Redford stops in the middle of the final scene, breath catching, eyes breaking as he whispers, "I can't do this." The entire set freezes. The director stumbles for words, the crew goes silent, and Barbra stands perfectly still, watching his trembling hands as if she sees something no one else can. No one understands why he collapses at the most crucial moment. But Barbra does. And the question remains, what could shatter Hollywood's most controlled man? January 1959. New York is cold, the kind of sharp winter that bites through coats and rattles old apartment windows. Inside a small walk-up on the Upper West Side, a 22-year-old Robert Redford sits on the floor with his newborn son in his arms. He's newly married, still juggling odd jobs, still racing between acting classes and late-night shifts. The future is uncertain, money is thin, but none of it matters right now. Not with Scott lying against his chest, warm and impossibly small. Scott Anthony Redford is 8 weeks old. A healthy baby with a strong cry and a habit of gripping his father's thumb as if he refuses to let go. Redford talks to him in a quiet voice. Promises about the life they'll build, the things they'll do together once Scott is old enough to walk, to run, to understand. He tells him about baseball, about oceans, about the mountains of California. Big dreams for a man who has barely figured out his own life. Yet every word feels real because he's speaking them to his son. Lola, his wife, watches from the doorway some nights. She sees Redford come home exhausted, smelling of paint or dishwater, but the moment he lifts Scott into his arms, something shifts. The tension in his shoulders softens. His eyes brighten. The world shrinks to just the two of them. Fatherhood, unexpected and overwhelming, has cracked something open in him, something tender, something unguarded. These are ordinary moments, but they feel sacred. A bottle warmed on the stove. Tiny breaths against Redford's neck. A lullaby hummed off-key in the dark. Scott's small hand curled around the collar of his father's shirt. Redford doesn't say it out loud, but he is terrified. Terrified of how much he loves this child. Terrified of how fragile happiness feels. Still, each night when he carries Scott from the crib, when he whispers, "Hey, buddy," into the infant's hair, he allows himself to believe in a future stretching far ahead of them. And then one morning, everything stops. It's early January. The city is quiet, streets still slick with frost. Lola goes to check on Scott and finds him lying too still, too quiet. She calls Redford's name, once, twice, her voice rising as a cold weight settles in her chest. Redford rushes in, but the room has already changed. There is an unnatural silence, one that does not belong in a nursery. No breath, no cry, no warning. Sudden infant death syndrome. 3 words that feel medical, distant, almost cruel in their simplicity. No explanation. No final moment. No chance to say goodbye. Redford stands beside the crib, staring at his son as if the world has tilted beneath his feet. Something inside him fractures, but he doesn't make a sound. At the funeral, he doesn't cry. When the tiny casket is lowered into the ground, he doesn't move. He answers condolences with a nod, a tight smile, a look that suggests he is present but unreachable. He is not stoic. He is not strong. He is drowning quietly. Because Redford understands something terrible. If he lets the grief in, really lets it in, he will never find his way back. So he buries it. Deep. Past memory. Past language. Past anything he can afford to feel. And life goes on, at least on the surface. He keeps working. Keeps auditioning. Keeps pretending that the world hasn't collapsed in the shape of a child he will never hold again. But grief doesn't disappear. It seeps into tiny cracks. It waits. It returns in places that feel safe enough to hurt. For Redford, it returns every time a script asks him to say goodbye. Every time he has to play a man losing someone he loves. Every time a scene calls for heartbreak, vulnerability, or the soft ache of a farewell. He doesn't tell anyone this. He never would. But from that winter onward, every love scene becomes a ghost story. Every tear belongs to someone else. Every goodbye is for Scott. And this unspoken truth, is the thread that will follow him for the rest of his career. Through success, through fame, through the carefully crafted roles that make him a Hollywood icon. But beneath the craft, beneath the control, beneath the golden-haired charm that audiences adore, there is a man who has never said the one goodbye that mattered. A man who left a nursery in 1959 with empty arms and a wound so deep, he built an entire career around hiding it. And it is this moment, this loss, this silence, this buried grief, that will return to him 14 years later on a crowded film set, in the final scene of The Way We Were. A moment no one else understands. Except Barbra. By the early 1960s, the world sees Robert Redford rising, first on television, then on Broadway, and eventually on the silver screen. A handsome young actor with golden hair and a quiet intensity, he seems perfectly built for Hollywood's fantasies. But the truth is simpler and far sadder. He is a man who has learned how to turn silence into a performance. Directors say Redford has a look, an ability to express longing, regret, and restraint without a single word. Audiences call it mystery. Critics call it emotional control. But none of them know what forged it. Every time a script calls for heartache, Redford doesn't think of the character he's playing. He thinks of a nursery in New York, a crib that was too quiet, a goodbye he never said. He learns early in his career what psychologists call emotional substitution, the ability to replace fictional pain with real pain. But for Redford, it isn't a technique. It's survival. When a scene demands tenderness, he thinks of Scott sleeping on his chest. When a scene demands loss, he thinks of waking up that January morning and hearing nothing. When a scene demands heartbreak, he reaches into a place he never speaks about. It makes him magnetic on screen. It also eats him alive. Co-stars sometimes notice it. They say Redford gets quiet before emotional scenes, almost withdrawn. He takes long walks alone. He rehearses in silence. He avoids eye contact until the camera is rolling, as if keeping his feelings locked away until the moment he needs them. One actress, years later, would put it simply. When the camera turned on, something inside him broke open. But the moment the director called cut, he would close again, fast, like a wound that refuses to bleed where others can see. By the early 1970s, Redford is no longer just a rising star. He is one of Hollywood's leading men. Hits like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Jeremiah Johnson cement him as an icon. Fame brings recognition, money, power. But it brings something else too. More roles that demand emotion, more scripts filled with love and loss, more scenes he cannot escape. Privately, he believes he has learned to manage it. 14 years have passed since Scott's death. He tells himself that time has softened the edges, that grief, like a river, eventually carves its way through the landscape of a life and becomes bearable. He even convinces himself that acting has healed him, that channeling the pain has given it purpose. Then The Way We Were arrives. When Redford reads the script, he sees it first as a romantic drama. Katie and Hubble, two brilliant but incompatible people who love each other deeply yet are destined to fail. A woman driven by ideals. A man drawn to ease. A relationship built on passion but fractured by reality. It is, on the surface, a love story. But for Redford, it is something else, a mirror. Hubble Gardner is a man who cannot hold on to the person he loves most. A man who loses quietly, gracefully, without ever letting the world see what it costs him. A man who walks away because staying would force him to confront a truth he cannot bear. Redford doesn't say it out loud, and maybe he doesn't fully realize it yet. But Hubble is the version of himself he has been playing for 14 years, a man shaped by a goodbye he never spoke. Still, he tells himself he can handle it. It's just another role. Time has passed. He's different now. But on the very first day of filming, Barbra Streisand notices something he doesn't notice in himself. When the camera rehearses a simple moment, a glance, a pause, an unfinished sentence, Redford tenses. Only slightly, like a muscle flinching beneath clothing, but enough for someone as perceptive as Streisand to feel it. Throughout the first week, Redford works flawlessly. He is punctual, professional, even charming. But between takes, he disappears for a few minutes. When he returns, his eyes look glassy, as if something behind them has shifted. He masks it well, but not well enough for someone who studies him as closely as Barbra does in their scenes. She senses a fracture, not visible, but present, like pressure beneath ice. Like he is acting on the surface, but drowning underneath. As the filming continues, the tension between Redford's internal world and the script's emotional demands grows heavier. The story of Katie and Hubble is not an abstract drama. It is the anatomy of a goodbye. A final, Painful farewell between two people who know they will carry each other long after parting ways. And somewhere deep inside, Redford knows he has carried someone too. Someone he cannot let go. Someone he has kept alive through every role, every silent moment, every withheld tear. The Way We Were is not just a movie challenging him as an actor. It is a movie threatening to expose the wound he has hidden for 14 years. By the time they reach the midpoint of production, Redford feels it. Barbra feels it. Even Sidney Pollack feels it, though he cannot explain it. The story is pressing on something real. The fiction is trespassing into memory. And Redford, for the first time in years, realizes he might not be in control of the grief he thought he buried. What no one knows, not yet, is that the final scene will become the moment where the past and present collide, where acting and truth become indistinguishable, where a man pretending to say goodbye on camera may finally, painfully, be forced to say it in real life. The set of The Way We Were was not chaotic. Sidney Pollack ran a tight, disciplined production. Scenes were planned, lighting was precise, marks were exact. Barbra Streisand arrived knowing every line, every shift of breath, every emotional contour of Katie Morosky. Redford, too, came prepared, calm, collected, the consummate professional. And yet, from the second week of filming, something felt off. It began subtly. Between takes, Redford would slip away, not far, just beyond the edges of the set, behind a column, or into the shadow of a doorway. He never said where he was going, never announced his return. He vanished quietly and reappeared the same way, as if trying not to disturb the air around him. At first, the crew assumed he was simply focused. Redford had always been the kind of actor who protected his process. But Barbra noticed things others didn't. The slight tightness in his jaw, the way he blinked too slowly after emotional scenes, the faint redness around his eyes, wiped quickly with the back of his hand before anyone could see. He carried himself like a man trying to stay inside a shell that kept cracking. During one lunch break, as the set buzzed around them, Barbra glanced across the soundstage and saw Redford sitting alone on the steps of the dressing room trailer. His shoulders were hunched, his elbows resting on his knees. He was holding something, small, rectangular, worn at the edges. A photograph. He stared at it the way someone stares at a wound. Barbra didn't approach. She didn't want to intrude on what felt private, sacred, or painful. Instead, she walked past slowly, quietly enough not to disturb him, but close enough to see the black and white image in his hand. A baby, no more than a few weeks old. A face round and soft, eyes closed, mouth slightly open as if caught mid-breath. Redford traced the outline of the tiny cheek with his thumb. Barbra stopped, for half a second, before she kept walking. She didn't ask. She didn't mention it. But from that moment, she watched him differently, with a kind of stillness, with the understanding of someone who senses a secret heavy enough to bend a man's spine. And slowly, the signs grew clearer. Redford began requesting small changes, nothing dramatic, but enough for Pollack to take notice. A line he wanted to phrase differently, a blocking note he wanted to alter, a moment he wanted to soften, another he wanted to postpone. When they approached the final scene, the one that had cemented the film's place in Hollywood history before it was even shot, Redford became restless. Pollack scheduled rehearsals. Redford delayed them. Pollack pushed again. Redford offered excuses. Let's do another scene first, Sid. Give me a day with the script. I think the pacing needs work. For an actor known for precision and discipline, it was unusual. But Pollack, who admired Redford deeply, gave him space. Directors often forget the emotional weight great actors carry, and Pollack was not blind to the currents swirling beneath Redford's surface. Still, delays became a pattern. A week passed, then another. The crew whispered. Barbra observed quietly, piecing together fragments that hadn't yet formed a whole. One afternoon, during a rehearsal that was meant to run smoothly, Redford stopped mid-sentence, closed his eyes, and breathed in sharply, as if the line had cut him somewhere deep. Barbra watched his hands tremble slightly before he shoved them into his pockets, forcing them still. Pollack pulled him aside. Exchange low, private, but tense. Bob, Pollack murmured. This scene isn't any harder than what we've done. What's going on? Redford looked at him, not with irritation, not with anger, but with something Pollack had rarely seen in him. Fear. A quiet, aching fear. Because it's goodbye, Sid, he finally said. And I've never been good at goodbyes. Pollock didn't understand. Not fully, but the sentence landed with enough weight to silence any questions. As filming continued, the distance between Redford's performance and his emotional state grew thinner. Sometimes, between takes, he walked off too quickly. Sometimes he stood still too long. Sometimes he seemed fine, steady, controlled, until a line landed too close to a buried memory, and his expression faltered for just a heartbeat before he concealed it again. Barbra, who shared nearly every emotional beat with him on screen, tried to follow the currents beneath his eyes. She recognized a certain fragility, not weakness, but the kind of break in a person that comes from holding something too heavy for too long. She never asked him about the photograph. She didn't need to. Some truths reveal themselves not through confession, but through the spaces between silence. As the production neared the final week, the tension crescendoed. The final scene, the street farewell between Katie and Hubble, was scheduled. A simple setup, no complex movement, no elaborate lighting. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a lifetime they couldn't fix. Redford arrived early that morning. Earlier than usual. Crew members later said they found him sitting alone on the curb where the scene would be filmed, staring at nothing, hands tucked in his pockets, shoulders tight, as if bracing for an impact only he could feel coming. When rehearsals began, he stumbled through lines he had mastered weeks ago. He avoided Barbra's eyes. He asked Pollock to adjust the camera angle, then asked him to restore the original setup, then asked him to change it again. Pollock, now visibly frustrated but careful, finally addressed him openly. Do you want to tell me why you're fighting this scene so hard? Redford looked down at the sidewalk. His voice was barely above a whisper. Because I know what it's asking of me, Sid. And I don't know if I can give it. Pollock, for the first time, saw the crack not in Redford's performance, but in the man himself. The final scene wasn't just a farewell for Hubble Gardner. It was something deeper, older, something Redford had spent 14 years running from. Barbra, watching from a distance, finally understood the photograph. The disappearances, the red eyes, the tremor in his breath. She didn't know the full story, not yet, but she knew enough. Knew that some goodbyes don't belong to the characters on the page. They belong to the people playing them. Take 17 begins like the others. The street is lit. The crew stands ready. Barbra takes her mark, breathing into the stillness of Katie Morosky. Redford steps into frame, shoulders squared, jaw tight. The way Hubble Gardner carries the weight of a life he can't fix. Sidney Pollock calls for camera speed. The slate snaps. Silence settles. Barbra delivers her lines with soft devastation. Redford listens, really listens, his eyes searching hers as if he wants the scene to be over and never end at the same time. Then comes the final line. The one that closes their story. The one he has avoided for 2 weeks. He inhales. He opens his mouth. And the world inside him breaks. I can't do this. The words fall out of him. Not Hubble's, but Redford's. His voice is thin, trembling, stripped of the polished composure everyone expects. His eyes flicker downward, and for a split second, Barbra sees something desperate in them. Fear, sorrow, a grief older than the film itself. He steps back, then turns away, and without another word, he walks off set. The crew freezes. Pollock blinks, stunned. Barbra doesn't move, not yet. She stays in character for a lingering heartbeat, as if immobilized by the emotional whiplash, the rawness that has just passed between them. Finally, she follows. Outside, the air is cooler. The lot feels larger, emptier. Redford's trailer sits at the far end, its small window glowing faintly. Barbra hesitates at the door, breath tight, then knocks. Bob, it's me. No answer. She tries the handle. It opens. Inside, the lights are dim. Redford sits hunched on the small couch, elbows on knees, head buried in his hands. Beside him, lying on the cushion, is the photograph she saw weeks before. The baby with closed eyes, peaceful, unaware of the future he would never have. Barbra steps inside softly. She does not pick up the photo. She sits across from him, hands folded gently in her lap, giving him the space to speak or not speak. For a long time, there is only silence. A thick, fragile silence that seems to hold 14 years of swallowed tears. Then Redford breathes out, a sound broken and uneven. His name was Scott. Barbra looks at him, not with pity, but with the stillness of someone who understands the weight of secrets. He died when he was 2 months old, Redford continues, voice scraping against something old and buried. SIDS. One morning he was there. The next, he wasn't. His eyes lift, red and wet, and Barbra sees a man who has been holding himself together for far too long. I never said goodbye, he whispers. Never held him the last time. Never told him. His words collapse into a breath he cannot finish. Barbra's throat tightens, but she doesn't speak. She lets him unravel at his own pace. Every scene like this, Redford says, gesturing vaguely toward the world outside the trailer. Every goodbye, every loss, it's him. It's always him. And this one, his voice breaks. This scene with you. It's the closest I've ever come to saying the words I never said. He swallows hard. If I say them now, if I let myself feel it, it becomes real. It becomes final. And I'm not ready for that. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. Barbra lets the silence breathe between them. Then she leans forward, not touching him, but anchoring her words with quiet strength. Bob, maybe that's exactly why you need to do it. His eyes widen slightly, as if her words have reached somewhere he has kept locked for years. This scene isn't Hubble saying goodbye to Katie, she says softly. It can be you saying goodbye to Scott. Maybe that's what this moment is offering you. A chance you didn't get. Redford closes his eyes, and for a moment Barbra thinks he might break completely. His hands tremble. His shoulders lift and fall, uneven. You've been rehearsing this for 14 years, she adds gently. Not for the movie. For yourself. He looks at her then, really looks. His face is wrecked, raw, stripped of every barrier he has used to survive the grief. I don't know how, he whispers. But Barbra shakes her head. Yes, you do. You've carried those words with you every day. You just haven't given yourself permission to say them. A long silence fills the trailer. Barbra waits. She does not push. She simply stays. Finally, Redford reaches out. His fingers touch the photograph, just a brush at first, then a firmer hold. He lifts it, stares at his son's face, and something shifts in his expression. Not relief, not acceptance, something smaller, more fragile. Resolve. He slips the photograph back into his pocket. Okay, he says, barely audible. Let's do this. Barbra nods. Together, they rise. Together, they walk back toward the light of the set. Behind them, the trailer sits still and silent, like a place where something long buried was finally named. Ahead of them waits take 18, the rebirth of a man who has carried grief like a second skin. The set is quiet in a way film sets rarely are. No clattering equipment, no chatter, no nervous laughter. Just a charged stillness, like everyone senses that something irreversible is about to happen. Redford and Barbra walk back together, side by side, but not speaking. The morning light glows softly against the storefronts of the recreated New York street. A fake winter breeze rustles through Katie's scarf. Redford adjusts his coat, but his fingers linger near the pocket where the photograph rests, as if grounding himself one last time before stepping into the unknown. Pollock approaches, ready to give instructions, but Barbra lifts a hand. No action, Sid, she whispers. Just let the camera run. Pollock hesitates, then nods. He understands enough to trust her. The crew moves quickly, almost reverently. Cameras hum to life. A boom operator takes his position with a care that feels ceremonial. No one speaks. No one wants to puncture the fragile calm settling over the set. Redford stands opposite Barbra. The distance between them is small, but the emotional distance is vast, filled with everything Hubble cannot say, and everything Redford has never said. For a long moment, they simply look at each other. But Redford isn't seeing Katie Morosky. He is seeing Scott. Not the baby in the photograph, but every possible version he never got to meet. The toddler learning to walk, the little boy running across a yard, the teenager with his father's eyes. A whole life that existed only in the spaces grief refused to let him enter. Redford inhales, and the breath shakes softly in his chest. Barbra sees it. Pollock sees it. The entire crew sees it. But no one interrupts. She begins her lines softly, Katie's voice rich with regret and love. But underneath the performance lies Barbra's steady presence, offering him space, offering him permission, just as she did in the trailer. Redford listens, but not as Hubble Gardner. Each word Barbra speaks becomes an echo of a goodbye he owes to someone else. Each pause becomes an opening he is terrified to step into. Then it happens. Redford's eyes lift fully to hers. And he lets go. The first line he speaks is quiet, almost fragile. But it carries a weight that feels too real, too personal. He isn't speaking to Katie. He isn't acting. He is telling his son goodbye. Every line trembles with the truth he has never voiced. His throat tightens. His breathing staggers. His eyes glisten, not with crafted emotion, but with raw, unfiltered grief rising after 14 years underground. Barbra holds the moment with astonishing delicacy. She doesn't pull focus. She doesn't overact. She simply receives him, steady, open, allowing him to pour every unsaid word into the space between them. The camera captures everything. The tremor in Redford's hands. The slight flinch in his jaw. The inhale that catches halfway. The fleeting glance toward his pocket. As if he wants to touch the photograph, but knows he shouldn't. Not yet. When he speaks the final line, the words dissolve into a breath that seems to carry all the weight of the goodbye he never gave. Then comes the moment, the one everyone would later remember. Hubble Gardner is supposed to turn and walk away. Redford hesitates. Just for a second. Just long enough for the entire set to hold its breath. His hand moves, slow, instinctive, toward the pocket where Scott's picture lies. He almost touches it, almost anchors himself in the memory. But then, with deliberate intention, he lets his hand fall. This time, he doesn't need to hold the photo to hold his son. With a single breath, deep, steady, and quietly breaking, Redford turns and walks away. Not as Hubble, as a father. It is the softest walk, almost weightless, but each step feels like a release. A surrender. A letting go that is not violent or showy, but deeply human. Pollock doesn't call cut. He can't. No one can. For 30 long seconds, the camera keeps rolling, capturing Redford's back as he moves farther down the street. The air seems to thicken. A grip wipes his eyes. Someone in wardrobe covers her mouth. Even the lights feel different, softened by a grief that has finally found its way into daylight. When Pollock finally whispers, "Cut," it is almost an apology, an acknowledgement that they have witnessed something sacred. Barbra stays still, absorbing the echo of what just happened. She knows the scene is perfect, not because it is beautifully acted, but because it is not acting at all. Across the set, Redford keeps walking until he reaches the end of the street. He doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. Something inside him has shifted, released, rebuilt. The crew remains silent as he disappears around the corner of the facade. No applause. No cheers. Just breath, unsteady, shared, human. Later, people would say it was the greatest goodbye scene ever filmed. Critics would call it subtle, devastating, iconic. But those on set knew the truth. It wasn't a scene. It wasn't performance. It wasn't craft. It was a father, after 14 years of silence, finally saying goodbye. When take 18 ended, something lingered in the air, an aftershock that no one quite knew how to process. The street on the soundstage, built meticulously for a fictional goodbye, now carried the weight of a real one. Crew members moved slowly, quietly, as if afraid any sudden movement would disturb the fragile transformation they had just witnessed. Barbra remained on her mark until Redford disappeared around the corner. She didn't chase after him this time. She knew better. She simply stood there, letting the silence close around her, feeling the echo of everything he had poured into her eyes just minutes earlier. Pollock didn't play back the footage. He didn't need to. Everyone on set knew they had captured something rare, something no director can manufacture, no actor can rehearse. For hours after the scene, Redford kept to himself. He didn't return to watch the dailies. Didn't ask how the shot looked. Didn't discuss retakes. He simply disappeared into his trailer, not out of despair this time, but out of exhaustion, the kind that comes when a weight you've carried for years finally shifts. Barbra waited, not with impatience, but with a quiet loyalty. It was early evening when Redford finally opened the door. His eyes were red, but softer. The lines around his mouth had relaxed, as if the tension that lived there had loosened its grip. The photograph was no longer on the couch. He kept it in his pocket again, its rightful place. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Barbra placed a hand on his shoulder in a gesture that was neither dramatic nor sentimental, just honest. The kind of touch two people exchange when they have witnessed each other at their most unguarded. That night, after the lot emptied, Pollock wrote in his journal, "Today I saw something I wasn't meant to see. A man forgiving himself. Years passed. Then decades. The Way We Were became an American classic. The final scene, take 18, was studied in film schools, dissected by critics, revisited by audiences who had no idea the grief behind it was real. They called Redford's performance restrained, devastating, masterful. They praised the subtle way he looked at Katie before turning away, unaware that he wasn't looking at Katie at all. They didn't know they were watching a father lay down a 14-year-old burden. Barbra never told them. For 50 years, she guarded that day like something sacred. When journalists asked about their chemistry, she smiled. When fans pressed about the emotional depth of the final scene, she deflected. When interviewers hinted at rumors of tension or intimacy, she denied them gently. Some truths belong only to the ones who live them. And yet, in 2024, during a rare televised interview, the host brought up the famous goodbye scene. He spoke casually, the way people speak when they don't know the weight of what they're touching. "What was the secret?" he asked Barbra. "How did you both make it so emotional?" Barbra paused, not out of hesitation, but out of respect. Then she said a single sentence. "Bob gave everything to that scene, more than anyone watching could ever understand." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Those who have known great love and great loss recognize the undertone. The rest simply thought she was complimenting a fellow actor. Across the country, Redford watched the interview alone. He didn't call her afterward. He didn't text. He didn't correct or clarify. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging a shared memory that didn't need retelling. A few years earlier, in 2018, he had given what would be his final interview before retiring. The journalist asked a simple question. "Do you have any regrets?" Redford was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the interviewer wondered if he had heard the question. Finally, he said, "I wish I'd learned earlier that saying goodbye doesn't mean forgetting. It just means accepting. It took me too long to understand that. Cost me too much." The interviewer didn't know what he meant. But Barbra did. Because on that November morning in 1973, during take 18, Redford didn't simply complete a scene. He didn't perform. He didn't act. He accepted. And in doing so, he allowed himself, just for a moment, to be free. Cinema has many great performances. Scenes etched into history, remembered for their artistry, their precision, their craft. But some scenes go deeper. They carry a human truth that overshadows the film they belong to. Take 18 is one of them. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real. A man stepping into grief. A friend holding space for him. A goodbye delivered 14 years late, but exactly when it needed to be spoken. In the end, the legacy of that scene is not cinematic. It is human. Because behind the camera, beyond the performance, underneath the iconic final look, it wasn't Hubble Gardner walking away. It was Robert Redford, a father, finally saying goodbye.